In this class, I want to introduce the topic of production. And as you can see here on the slide, I've already set up the inputs for production. Labour, land, capital, and entrepreneurship or enterprise. And we're going to explore this and then later on in subsequent classes develop it much more deeper, in a deeper way, and also link it to costs. And of course, costs gives us one side of the equation for profits. And that takes us to the firm and the theory of the firm. The firm takes us to industry. And you can see how economics builds up, one layer upon the other. So in this case, we're going to start by talking about the classification of resources. And we'll start with labour, land, capital, and entrepreneurship. 4 factors of production. 4 inputs that must be present for output to occur. We must have somebody or something initiating the work process. Call it labour. It happens in space. We need some place at least to stand. So all production takes place in a spatial context. So we have land. Generally speaking, we have capital. We need to even write down what we're saying. If we're writing a book, and that's our production process, we need a pen and paper or a word processor or a typewriter. We need something. We need to be able to capture our ideas. So we need capital. And lastly, we need enterprise. We need to be able to judge whether this is a good idea or not, whether we should go forward with it or just leave it, abandon it and do something else. So we have 4 factors of production: labour, land, capital, and entrepreneurship. And by the way, we have 4 rewards for those 4 factors of production. Labour gets a wage or salary, land gets rent, capital gets a rate of return, and enterprise gets profits. So they are rewarded for their contribution to output. So that's land is normally a natural resource, but it does include fisheries and forestry and so on. And so we widen the definition slightly there. Capital, as I said, is the accumulation of productive resources and then the resources that are brought to bear when we want to produce something. So resources in a non-human sense. So people are labour, and this is the non-labour contribution, the machinery, the equipment, the non-human parts of the production process. And enterprise, of course, is the entrepreneur, who we now talk more and more about in business studies and in economics. So the inputs, generally speaking, we assume can be combined in varying proportions. So in the long run, the amount of land, labour, capital used in the production process can be varied. If we do something in a particular way, if we make a product in a particular way right now, in the future we might find a more efficient way of doing it, which involves a different combination of land, labour, capital, and entrepreneurship. So the 4 factors of production may be combined differently over time. We become more efficient in effect. Sometimes they must be fixed in proportion. For example, in the case of 1 man or 1 woman per machine. So you can't have 1.5 men for every machine. So we have fixed proportions. The resources are limited in quantity. Well, all economic resources are limited in quantity, so that shouldn't surprise us. So the inputs into production are also limited. The amount of land, the amount of labour, the amount of capital, the amount of entrepreneurship. Everything is limited. That's the world in which we live. So the resources are limited in quantity. And all economic goods are scarce in supply. That really is our definition of economic goods, goods that are scarce. If someone tries to sell you, some air, well, air is free. I get the same air as you do, and I don't have to pay for the air I breathe. It's necessary for my life, but it's free. It's not scarce. Thank goodness. If it was scarce, we'd have a price. Things that are scarce have a price. And the factors of production, land, labour, capital, and entrepreneurship, these are the factors of production. They're no different from other goods. We buy and sell labour, or the services of labour. We don't actually buy labour. We buy the services of labour. We buy the services of the products. We may own the machinery. We may own the land. And we ourselves may be the entrepreneurs. But we buy the factors of production. We buy their services. Sometimes we buy them outright, as in the case of capital or land. And we use these for production purposes. Generally, they are versatile. We have land, we may use it for different purposes, perhaps. We could use it for agriculture or for building houses. So often, resources are versatile. Sometimes, however, there are exceptions. For example, we build a specific machine to do a particular task. You can't do anything else. Many machines are limited in what they can do. I use a laptop often. I can't make tea on the laptop. It does not make tea. It does word processing and spreadsheets and PowerPoints and all of that, but it does not make tea. So some machines are limited in what they can do. Before production can take place, a decision must be made regarding the combination of the factors of production to be used. We have to decide how much land, how many workers, what technology. We have to make decisions, and those decisions probably will be conditioned by the cost of the different factors of production. But we can't just say we'll have production and we'll have so much land, labour, capital, entrepreneurship. We have to decide what it is we're going to produce and what combination of the inputs we're going to use. We observe that as output increases, unit costs also increase. It costs more to make more. However, sometimes there are exceptions. Sometimes big production quantities are cheaper than smaller ones. We have sometimes what we call economies of scale, economies of large-scale production. The more you produce, the cheaper it is, because we're able to get specialist machinery, we're able to train workers in special techniques so they become very skillful at those techniques, and average cost as a consequence may fall. We also have to think about factor substitutability. Within the production process, it may be possible to substitute one factor for another. For example, we may be able to substitute capital for labour. The example I gave earlier, a laptop. Once upon a time, we'd have old typewriters, manual typewriters, which were not very efficient. And the output didn't look very nice. There were a lot of mistakes, perhaps, and it had to be rubbed out. So we have factor substitutability now. We can substitute one item for another sometimes in the production process. The laptop could be used for word processing, but it could also be used for calculations on a spreadsheet, or it could be used for communications on the internet. So sometimes factors of production become very versatile in the way they can be used. Some can't be transferred from one type of work or one type of input to another. It's very difficult sometimes to take workers who have got an expertise in some type of work. The example I give here is coal miners who are expert in coal mining. They know what the conditions are, they know how to work safely, they know how to do things that most of us can't do. But at the same time, if you take the coal miners and ask them to work in an office using some dedicated computer that does some routines in the office, the coal miner may not be able to do it. But likewise, the person in the office could not go into the mine and do what the coal miner does. Sometimes we can't substitute factors of production. They're fixed according to the expertise or the background of the different factors. When we deal with this type of material, we have to discuss the law of diminishing returns. This is sometimes known as the law of eventual diminishing marginal physical productivity. That's really a horrible name. It's so long and so complicated. We'll just call it the law of diminishing returns for the moment. Perhaps in seminars we'll be able to discuss the longer name and why it exists. But the law of diminishing returns only applies in the short run. Now, the short run in economics is not measured in days and weeks and time. It's measured in terms of the fixity of the factors of production. If one factor of production is fixed, that's short run. In the long run, all factors of production are variable. All factors of production can be varied. In the short run, at least one factor of production must be fixed. If it's fixed, that's the short run. We don't measure it in days and times and weeks and years. We don't do that. We measure it in terms of the fixity of the factors of production. So short run, at least one factor of production held constant. In the long run, all the factors of production are variable. That's what we say is the long run. Everything is variable in the long run. Now, the law of diminishing returns, the law states that the addition of successful equal amounts of some variable input. So if we're talking about a production process, we're adding more and more workers, and all the workers are equally efficient, we'll assume. So as you add more and more workers to some fixed factor of production, to the amount of land, to the factory, the building. But as you add more and more workers, eventually you get smaller and smaller extra output. And the reason for that is very simple. The workers start to get in each other's way. There's not enough jobs or tasks for them to be efficiently used. You keep on adding workers, eventually the factory will fill up with workers and nothing will happen. There will be no output. I know that sounds a little bit silly, but it could do. If you fill up the factory, then there won't be any output. So it sounds complicated. Well, if a company has a fixed amount of capital but can vary the number of workers it employs, eventually output will fall as more workers are employed. Okay. Now, there are possible reasons. There's not enough capital or space for them to work efficiently. And they may even get in each other's ways, as I said a moment ago. We may illustrate the law of diminishing returns by changes in marginal output or changes in marginal costs. The law of diminishing returns really applies to the last unit produced. Did it cost more to make the last unit compared to the one previously? Or the one previous to that? In other words, what's happening as output is being scaled up or cut back? Can we see changes in marginal costs? What's the marginal cost? What's the cost of that last unit? Not all the units produced, but just that last one. And how does that compare with the one just before it? because that's a measure of our marginal cost. Look at this table. Here's the number of workers, up to 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. Total output starts at 20, goes to 114. Average, well, we just divide the total by the number of workers. So we get fractional outputs, but don't worry, we just ignore that. And we have the marginal. Now, the marginal output is the first worker, 20, who produces 20. The second worker working with the first worker, the two of them can produce 45. So the second worker, who's just as competent as the first worker, just as efficient as the first worker, but the second worker has managed to be able to produce with the first worker an extra 25 units. So by dividing the work up between them, they were able to work more efficiently and the output went up. The total output went up to 45. So in other words, the addition of the second worker has meant an extra 25 units of output. If we had a third worker, the output would go to 63, let's say. And the marginal of the third worker is 18. So the first one was 20, the first worker working on his or her own, 20. The second worker working with the first worker contributed 25 extra. And the third worker, 18. The fourth worker, 15. So we can see the marginal output. How much extra output can we assign to each worker? And that's what the table shows. This is something that's very important in economics, in the type of economics we study in particular. And it's something that we'll be coming back to over and over on the course. We'll see it in different ways, in different applications, but this is very important. So try and relate to what this table is stating. It just shows the change in the total output when we change the number of workers, and that means we can work out the marginal, the contribution of that worker. The first worker, marginal contribution, 20. Second worker, marginal contribution, 25. Third worker, 18. Starts to fall. Next one, 15. Fifth worker, 12, and so on. And we do use this a lot in economics. So become familiar with that table. It is a good idea. Returns to scale. Well, returns to scale is returns to the size of the organization. Scale means size. As the size of an organization changes, its unit costs may change. That's the scale. That's the size of the organization. If all the inputs in the production process in let's say a factory, if all of the inputs are increased by 10% and output increases by more than 10% as a result, we call that an economy of size. We've increased all the inputs, all the labor, capital, the floor space, we've increased everything by 10%, and as a consequence, more has been produced. We call that an economy of scale. Companies may use specialized machines and expert staff when they grow, and this may reduce their unit costs. And that's an economy of size, an economy of scale. As an organization grows, it gains from bulk buying. Specialist machinery can be used, and personnel and research and development work can be looked at. So the organization becomes more efficient. If output increased by the same proportion, let's say 10%, this is known as a constant return to scale. If output increases by, say, output increases by 10% and all the inputs increase by 10%, then that's a constant return to scale. If the output increased by a proportion less than the proportionate increase in inputs, if output increased by 8% and inputs increased by 10%, that's a diseconomy of size, diseconomy of scale. In other words, as the organization is getting bigger, it's becoming more inefficient. For example, as an organization grows, it may become more difficult to control and the employees do not relate to the objectives of the organisation. It's too big. The organisation is too big. They don't relate to it. If you work in a small company, you may empathise with the business. You may like the business because it's a small organisation. Everybody knows everybody. Everybody knows your name. You're a part of the team. A big business, you're just someone working on a machine. So you may not be as committed. And that's all I'm going to deal with in terms of production. This is very important, this particular class. So do go over it again, make your own notes, and make sure that you are clear about these points. We will be doing them again and again and again. We tend to run over the material quite a lot on the course, but you will see them crop up again. I've appended some notes here. You can just freeze the screen, I hope it works. Freeze the screen and make your own notes from here. And it's just about returns to scale. I'm not going to go into it here, but it's there if you want to look it over. And that's all I'm going to deal with. So let's leave it at that here. Say thank you for watching.